Hey everyone, FusedVR coming at you.
Abdul here.
And I'm Hassan.
Together, we are the FusedVR team. Super excited to be talking to you all today. And we're just going to be talking about some of our learnings from developing Artillery Bay, our first ARKit game. And before we get started with that, we have a giveaway for purchasing the full game. Comment below on what your favorite video of ours on our whole YouTube channel. You've got hundreds to choose from. And just make sure you're subscribed as well. And the first 10 will send you a promo code so you can unlock the full game and play to your heart's content. So with that out of the way, let's kind of dive into the things we've learned from developing our first ARKit game. And there's definitely a ton to talk about. High level, the things we're going to talk about are the art, the game design, and the AR design. There's definitely a lot to talk about there. So I'm going to throw this over to Abdo first. Tell us about what were the hardest parts about building all the assets for this game. What were the easiest parts and how it finally came all together?
Sure, yeah. The hardest part were obviously timing. We did it in a very short time. We had to squash a lot of stuff to be done in a very short time. But the second hardest thing would be the scale. Figuring out an interesting environment that would mostly fit inside of your portrait mode screen on your iPhone or iPad. iPad is easier because you can get switched to landscape. That made it easier, but portrait mode is harder to achieve environments for. The third hardest thing is obviously details. Add in details around in the environment, but not too much to kill performance. I have to add, that compromise aesthetics versus performance is always around figuring out just the right amount of detail, just enough to keep things interesting, but not enough to kill the performance or distract the player from the main playing arena.
Just want to add a point. It was funny when I remember that one of the original versions of the game, you created Abdo a really beautiful environment, and we were testing it with someone. They opened the game, and they just spent the whole time looking at the environment instead of actually playing.
so yeah, we made like the environment was just like a cutout of the ocean, and it was very deep and very like detailed. Fishes swimming around, a lot of rocks, and a treasure chest and all of that. Yeah, I remember Hassan saying, "Well, people are not playing this; they're just looking around the environment."
I think it was in that iteration we were still like trying to figure out how people react to ARKit. Definitely a lot of user testing that I want to talk about a little later. And specifically, I think in that iteration, like the water level was probably 5 times as high as we have it now. And I think that was one of the reasons that caused people to just want to explore, which is not a horrible thing.
Yeah, it wasn't a bad thing. It's just we didn't want players to be looking around. We want them to actually play the game and not just... It wasn't a seeing sight-in application. The easy stuff from this where it had a lot of similarities with VR dev, obviously, from the art side of things. VR and AR are not too different, especially if you're designing mobile VR, then mobile AR is not going to be very different in terms of how you design or model or even texture stuff. The easy thing for this one was texturing by far. It was kind of tricky, but still, it's like you only have one map, the diffuse map. So it's nice that way.
Can you talk a little bit about like the low poly versus mid poly back and forth that we had?
I guess we wanted to go low poly, but then it wasn't enough. Then we kind of switched to a higher poly. Then it was too much. Had to dim it down in between where, again, there's like enough poly to pull off details, but not too much polygon count, like polygons to kill the performance. There's always that performance roof you gotta be careful of.
I like low poly. I'm a huge fan.
Well, when you're texturing or lighting the stuff, then it gets tricky because low poly is interesting, but it's also can be boring very easily. So you have to pull off a lot of lighting tricks and post-processing in Unity.
Which we didn't really do. That was I think the interesting part.
Yeah.
It almost seemed that like basically just having a slight ocean, having the foam around pretty much any objects on the top allowed the lighting to be good enough to add that little extra effect to everything underneath it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's another tricky part with AR is that you don't control the whole environment. You just control a part of it. So you have to make sure your stuff looks good no matter what the background and the lighting is. So like if your players are in a dark room, how would that compare versus when they're outside playing?
That was actually one of the trickier things. ARKit provides you with a light estimate that we actually ended up ignoring for performance reasons, because real-time lighting is hard, and getting the right effects can definitely be tricky there. So it was one of the things where we chose, we're like, look, we're just going to do our own lighting and it'll stay consistent across environments. And I think that felt like the right decision.
I think it did, yeah. Looking at the results, there's enough contrast in whatever environment, like whichever environment you're playing the game with, I think you'll find enough contrast.
I agree. And I wanted to jump in, and I think that something that would be cool to talk about, Abdo, is your process for, early on, we had very basic ships, and then they got a little more complex and more complex and more complex, and they finally got to the final ones now. And that was true of all of the art. I think that when we do the tutorials, it's very easy to see our prototyping process. But can you talk about like the prototyping on the design side? Like, how do you develop a model from you're just going to make something basic, then you're going to take it up a step, and then at what point do you decide you're going to go all out with it?
Yeah. So this is like different depending on the project. I don't take the same process for each one, but I think for this one, it was basically like a very basic ships, like the very, very early on models of the ships, Vasant, if you remember those.
Yeah.
They're like very basic, very boring to look at, but they were enough to get us started. And then I had to start looking at references on different, I was like going for the cartoonish style. So I was going through references, kind of like sketching a few things on my side of things, like looking at references, trying to combine different references together, coming up with a distinct style. Then when I figure out the detail, or like the amount of detail I want to put in a ship, I have to figure out the like the rest of the ships, how they're going to look, or the rest of the art assets they're going to need it for the project. Basically, you have to maintain a kind of like a consistent look aesthetically, and also on the level of details you want to add to all of the assets, so that you end up with a consistent looking environment all around. Obviously, the player ship got a little extra detail just because we want to give it that like hero. You see it all around, like the anime, cartoons, whatever. The Halo always has extra more details. So yeah, it's basically starting out with something very basic for prototyping that I sent you guys to use inside Unity and develop, and then I kind of take on references, look around, change. Then I try to develop for each asset, like the ships. I try to develop a character of its own, and I think that was that came out nicely.
I want to transition here to talking about a little bit about user testing. Hassan, I know you can speak a bunch to this, so fire away.
Yeah, I mean, well, first of all, for anybody who's never done it before, isn't familiar with it, it's super important, and it was huge for us. I mean, I think you can never do enough testing. We did a good amount, but I think we could have done more, and we'll continue to do some. But I mean, we approached it from a lot of different ways. I think the general techniques that I've seen that work really well for it is that early on, it's good to just put the app or the experience in people's hands and see what they can do without providing any guidance. And that's really important because, like people, when they get this in the real world, they're not going to have any guidance. And early on, you want to demo that process, but it's not like it's counterintuitive. It's against your instinct to not give somebody any guidance early on. Like you want to give them a set of instructions. But my personal philosophy on it, and I think it worked well for us, is that at first you should just be really broad with the testing. Let people try out your experience, see what they do and what they explore. And then after that, start running specific tests to assess certain things. So our first round of user tests, or at least some of the ones that I did, I remember we just put it in somebody's hands. We told them, play it and talk out loud. So as they're thinking things, we wanted them to say what they were thinking. And then after that, we did more specific tests. I remember FusedMan and I, we did one where he was testing out multiplayer and I was testing out single player. And there we gave them more specific instructions. And after that, you get a pretty good glimpse of how people will use it.
More often than not, you'll be surprised what people come up with.
Yeah. I mean, that's how it helped us to realize, because we didn't give in one of those first user tests, we didn't give that guy specific instructions. So he just opened the app and we realized that, you know, the environment was so big that it actually distracted him from doing the stuff we wanted him to do. If we had told him exactly what he was going to experience, like, we might not have realized that the environment was a little too large, because he would have jumped in and hit the play button and then it would have been obvious.
As a little tangent, I don't know if you remember this, FusedMan. A long time ago, we were playing around with something, and I remember designing a Pikachu head for you to use.
Yeah.
And somebody saw that and it was like, why is there a yellow bunny around? No. My point was like, I designed a Pikachu head and someone else thought it was a yellow bunny. So feedback is important.
Yeah. And I think that it's scary. I mean, a lot of people, you know, they don't want to, or they're afraid of getting user testing because, you know, when somebody says that what you built is trash, it doesn't feel good. But my approach is that if you do it early, you can stop yourself from building a lot of trash.
A bigger trash, yeah.
Not hit you as hard.
Yeah. Yeah. I think definitely have thicker skin. Otherwise, it's
well,
you're gonna leave too early.
I think the quote there is "fail forward," and that's literally what we were trying to do. Also, Hassan, do you want to talk a little bit about how we were user testing when we know we still had issues, but like we still thought it was okay to actually get feedback from users?
Yeah, I think that's huge, especially because it's a little difficult in the, like, if we break it down into two phases, like the exploration phase and then the specific like flows stage. So again, in exploration, you're just letting people use it. In specific flows, you're testing out specific flows of the app or experience. Like in the exploration phase, it's tough because people might run into those bugs and you kind of just need to, I mean, ignore that because you know that it's going to happen. But when we got to the flows part of testing, it's easier. Like, you don't have to have a fully functioning app because you can just put them down a flow that you know works while you're still developing the other flows that might be buggy.
Yeah.
Hassan, did you have to tell them like this is a very early beta or whatever? Like, did you have to be a little apologetic about it? Like, don't be too harsh, kind of
well, I think
subtexts.
So the thing that I remember that we studied this before too, because I've studied some design in the past, and I think that that's a really important point for us. I think we almost always told them, and maybe we were sometimes even a little bending the truth. We always said, this is a prototype. We just started working on it like a few weeks ago, even when it was like 2 or 3 months into the project. And that's because it actually makes people more comfortable with being brutally honest. If you tell somebody I've been building this for my whole life, like my life in this app, they're not going to be honest. But if you tell them this is a prototype, all feedback is welcome, then they'll say anything.
Yeah, and I mean, that's, I think, how we got the feedback we did. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the whole 6 months project. There was a stream I did last Tuesday where there was this guy in the chat who was asking, like, I'm working on this long-term project, probably 1 to 2 years, a lot longer than we've been working on it. And how do I stay motivated and get from start to end? Because I think that's really a huge deal. I know in the past we've definitely struggled with that before because it's not easy getting to the end. So I want to kind of talk a little bit about how we started, and I'm kind of curious if you guys remember. It started as kind of a branch off of Star Wars, if you guys remember. We were like playing around with ARKit, and we were just like, oh, this is fun. We like the multiplayer. We showed a video recently about the AR and VR connection together. So that's where it started. And then we're like, okay, so let's try AR and AR together. And so we had a bunch of drones flying around that we would shoot. very, very different from where we are right now.
From drones to ships, that's...
If I remember correctly, we're like, there's way too much movement that's happening right now. What if we were defending something? At the time, it was still like a battleship or something like in space.
Yeah, it was still something spacey.
Well, we also consider it. We like basically moved to like a tower defense type of concept, and we're like, what does tower defense look like in AR? Like, it might be easier because the person can use, like, they can go around it very easily. Maybe even they can use the screen to rotate stuff or get a new vantage point.
And so I think from there we were like, it was still kind of this first-person shooter type of concept where like you're, I guess, shooting and trying to defend your towers type of thing. We were like wavy on a bunch of different things, and then we finally transitioned and we're like, it seemed like a lot of fun. I think like the very early prototypes, I don't even know what version you would call that, like 0.0001.
Yeah, that's legit. Yeah.
something ridiculously early. Just like moving it around. I don't even think we had shooting at that point, but just like having like your ship move around, like you don't have a lot of movement. It felt good.
Yeah, there was no shooting. There was like the two ships I remember making didn't have any cannons attached. We would just like, they're just gonna rush to the player and explode when they get there, I guess.
Yeah. So, and I think, at that point, we're just like, this is great. It feels great. We're going to keep going through this iterative process. And fundamentally, I think the hardest part, and I think we should all talk to this, was like setting deadlines and struggling to meet them was definitely a challenge. But I think it was one of those things that really allowed us to continually hit milestones and eventually get to our end goal. You guys want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I can jump in. I think that when it comes to sticking to a plan, I mean, I'm just a huge nerd around like planning processes and habits. One book that I recommend, it's actually called, I think it's called The Power of Habit, and it talks about what you need to do to be able to stick to something. And the points that really stand out to me are, it talks about a lot of different points, but one is like having the right group or community to support you, because a lot of times like your context can make the difference in whether or not you stick to something. And so I feel like, you know, if you're struggling to complete your project, one great way to do it, and this is a shameless plug for our channel, like follow our community or find a different community. But I think it's really key that you have a community somewhere, and acknowledge that like for any person, soloing something is really tough. So I think that was really big for me, is that we were working on this as a team. And then the second thing is setting the right habits. Like, think about what are the things that need to put you in position to be successful on the project. And for me, that was just like waking up really early before I did anything else and having specific time where I work on this project before anything else comes up in the day. And I think that what the right habits look like are different for everyone. But I think it's important to think about like, what are the small habits that you could set that end up leading you to be productive in the ways you want to be.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with what you said about the points of habits. And I think the guy who asked the question about staying motivated, if he's being a solo, if he doesn't have a team, that's definitely one big reason to it. I think having a team of 2 to 3 people is essential in staying motivated and pushing, like what Fuseman was mentioning about deadlines and sticking to them and struggling to meet them. Having a team definitely helps with that. Also joining a community, but also having stuff at stake. I remember watching something, I think it was from GDC, when a guy was talking about their indie game, and he said, we were a team of people. We just kind of quit our day job and we gave ourselves a year. If we didn't manage to publish an indie game by the end of the year, then we'd have to go back and look for jobs or full-time jobs. So they had something at stake, which is like the pain of having to go again and look for jobs and going back to the old routine. And I think that helped them stay motivated to finish an indie game or publish it within 12 months.
Yeah. I think having something at stake, but also having a team for the sake of a team, which is, I think, more of what was happening in the live stream. Like, they had a team, it was great, but it seemed like being brutally honest with each other was something that was lacking. And that's, as a team, I know we're like super nice about it, but we will say when something is wrong, and like we'll try to work together toward actually fixing it. And I think that's probably even more so important than just having a team. It's having a team that you work well together with and are willing to work together to kind of push out the best that you possibly can. And I think that's something that we did really, really well.
Well, I think what you're talking about is that like the element of friendship to it, and it doesn't have to be like with time. You just know when you meet people who can do cool stuff and you can do like other cool stuff, so you kind of, your skills are complementary to each other. You just know, hey, we can create cool stuff together.
I like that framing of it. You do cool stuff, somebody else does cool stuff. You bring together a team, you do more cool stuff. That's FusedVR.
We should have that as a tagline.
We all do cool stuff.
FusedVR, we all do cool stuff.
I like it. Anything else you guys want to say before we wrap up?
No, I just think that it's a fun time to jump into ARKit. And if you haven't already, you'll find that if you're really good with Unity or other engines, ARKit was really well designed in terms of the developer experience. I mean, there's stuff to improve, but it's a great place to just get started and start making AR experiences. I think everybody that's interested should just dive in and make something.
Yeah, I think the whole AR arena is the next big thing, or at least that's what it sounds like from everything that's going on. If Google does a good job next year, I think it'll definitely take off.
Yeah, I think high level, the big players to watch out for are Snapchat with Lens Studio, Facebook with AR Studio, Apple with ARKit, and Google with ARCore. I think they're all tackling pretty interesting problems that are going to hit a wide bunch of consumers pretty soon. So I think that's what I'm super excited for. That does it for this video. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you guys enjoyed our kind of high-level pseudo-postmortem, pseudo-learnings. Make sure to, if you want to partake in the giveaway, make sure to comment below what your favorite video of ours is, and just make sure you're subscribed. If you also do us a favor and like the video, that helps us out a ton. Until next time, this has been Fuse, man.
Abdo.
And Hassan.
And we're signing out.
Thank you guys for listening.